Hey everybody, it is Alan Kay. Today I wanted to talk about how is a chest hidden. I know Forrest has consistently said that he never said the chest was buried, but buried also has multiple definitions, buried and sepulchered and entombed. So I wanted to share my thoughts on all the different meanings and different quotes and different ways that he has alluded to ways that a treasure or things could be hidden. So without further ado, let me just jump into it. So like I said, Forrest has always said, I never said it was buried. And the first quote I took was from People magazine in 2013. It's probably not the first time he said it, but it's a popular magazine. I'm just going to read this. What serious adventurers should remember is to not believe anything that is not in my poem or otherwise in my book. There's some misinformation out there. For instance, I never said I buried the chest. I said only that I hid it. That is not to say that it's not buried, so maybe we need to define the terms. Does hidden mean in plain sight? What is the difference between buried, entombed, sepulchered? So that's not anything new to anyone, but I'm just going to flag that he actually has said that's buried. And I'm going to credit youshopweship on YouTube for this one. He's got a ton of great audio out there, or she, I'm not sure. They have a ton of great audio out there, and if you're not subscribed to their channel, highly recommend it. But let me just play what they have on their channel right now.
People to get outdoors and just enjoy the great outdoors for what it is. And he has a book in which he includes a poem, and in the poem somewhere there are different clues as to where the treasure might be buried. But let's get acquainted. Number one, Mr. Forrest Fenn, good to have you on the program. Thanks for being here. How are you?
Well, I'm doing fine, and thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
You bet. Was it about 3 years ago you first buried it, or more recently?
Well, something like that. I'm 82 years old now, and I buried it when I was either 79 or 80 years old.
And what was the backstory on that? From when you buried it, did you bring a shovel?
Now, I didn't say that I buried it. I said I hid it.
You hid it.
That's not to say it isn't buried, but I've never used that word.
You've never used the word, so maybe you did and maybe you didn't. How about
First, in what is it? I know you live in New Mexico. Is the treasure buried in New Mexico, or could it be anywhere in the Rocky Mountains?
Well, it's buried more than 8.5 miles north of Santa Fe in the Rocky Mountains, but below the Canadian border.
Okay, that gives us a hint of where it is. Now,
how did you pick that particular spot to bury the chest?
Well, I don't want to give too many more clues, but it's a very special place to me, and otherwise I would not have done it. I mean, I couldn't just take it out and buried in the ground someplace where I didn't know where I was.
So as you saw, I put 2+ times. I'm going to give that last one a 0.3. He didn't say he buried it, but he's implying that he couldn't just go bury it somewhere that he didn't know. He had to have hid it or buried it or sepulchered it or entombed it somewhere he was familiar with. Otherwise, you couldn't go back and find it. So I thought that was interesting. And again, thank you, youshopweship, for that little audio montage. That's pretty awesome. But just to flag that he has said that it was buried, and those could be mistakes. So I'm not saying that it is buried because he said that. I'm just saying that he has said that it was buried, whether they are mistakes or not. Moving on. So this one's from A Gypsy's Kiss that everyone knows and loves. Thank you, Toby and Shelley, for letting me play this. If you're not subscribed to A Gypsy's Kiss, obviously, again, highly recommend it. They've got tons of audio, tons of video, tons of analyses for many years. This actually came from the Lure screening, and I wasn't there, but I've heard that Forrest was kind of dragged on stage to answer some questions. So I'm not sure he was in the best mood to be answering some of these questions. But either way, the question was, are you still burying things? And I think the woman that asked this was talking about the jars, but Forrest went right to the chest, and you'll hear the answer, and then we'll talk about it. Here we go.
No, I'm not burying anything.
No, nothing else? No bells? No vessels?
No. And I never said that I buried the treasure chest. That doesn't mean that it isn't buried. I think you're getting technical. I don't want to have to define the terms.
Well, I wasn't speaking about the chest.
If you look the word burial up in the dictionary, it talks about sepulchering, about entombing, And there's all kinds of definitions, and quite frankly, it's very confusing. So I don't want to answer the question whether the treasure chest is buried or not. Let me give you an example. If I laid the treasure chest on top of the ground, and some weeds blew in there and covered it up, now is it buried or is it sepulchered? Is it entombed? So it's best not to go there, I think. The clues will lead you to the treasure, and whether it's buried or not, you can find it if you can find the blaze as a result of starting with the first clue. That's what you have to do. No, I'm not.
Oops, sorry. So first off, again, he's just kind of reiterating that there's multiple definitions for the word burial or sepulturing or entombing. But then I'm also going to definitely flag that last part, which is where he's saying the clues will lead you to the treasure, and whether it's buried or not, you can find it. If you can find the blaze as a result of starting with the first clue, that's what you have to do. That's very familiar and similar to what he said recently in the Voice of America audio interview, where he's saying, well, I'll get there later, but if you find yourself at the last clue, look down, because that's where the treasure is. But again, just kind of establishing that he refuses to say that it's buried, but he's implying that it's something like that. So let me keep going here. Thank you again, A Gypsy's Kiss. Is it under a flagstone? So this image, I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It was in Secrets of San Lazaro, which I have the book. It's in Too Far to Walk, Charmaine and Me. It's in a different illustration, but it's in Mysterious Writings, Buried or Hidden in 2018. And I'm just going to read this quote from, I think it was from Mysterious Writings. I think it was. While sitting on the floor and leaning against the south wall, I placed my cup of hot soup on the round piece of flagstone. It sounded a little empty and different from what I had subconsciously expected. I carefully removed the 5 broken pieces of flagstone, one at a time. To our astonishment, we discovered a black plainware jar that had been buried up to its rim under the floor. Inside the jar rested a rectangular painted bowl, and both of them contained corn kernels. So I'm not the first or the millionth person to think that it's totally possible that the chest is hidden in a way like this. So whether it's, I doubt it's in a room in a pueblo somewhere, buried, just below in an earthen jar, but it could just be, just below the ground, hidden by a cover or a lid. So again, this is one of many thoughts that I have. Maybe it's buried under something, a flat stone or a flagstone, or something like that. Under a grave marker. So in Thrill of the Chase, everyone should have read My War for Me. I think Forrest said, if there's one thing you do, read My War for Me, out of all the stories in Thrill of the Chase. So I'm just going to read this. As we rose and started walking in the tall grass towards the helicopter, a strange chain of events began to unfold. I tripped over something and fell flat on my face. That never happens to me. Then, when I started to push myself up, I came nose to nose with a rude aluminum grave marker. How strange and out of place it seemed. I could barely read the dirty nameplate, but did make out the name of a French soldier. Then suddenly, we saw more grave markers. The more we looked, the more we found. These soldiers had evidently been killed during the French Indochina War in 1947, but I had tripped over a crudely made stone grave marker that had fallen face down in the grass. Before I could roll it over to see what it said, the pilot was strapping in. I had to hurry. A French name and rank followed by arcing English words across the top. And everyone knows this. If you should ever think of me when I have passed this veil, and wish to please my ghost, forgive a sinner and smile at a homely girl. Those words were burned in my brain, and I could see them just as clearly now as I did then, when I was so rushed. I took care to replace the stone marker as it had fallen, and smooth the grass to hide it over. The promise that place had made to me had been kept, and mine to it as well. So a couple of these things I highlighted because I'm going to touch on them later. But again, it comes back to, flat ground. There was a flat grave marker, a rude grave marker that, he picked up, and then it changed his entire awareness of life. So maybe there's just something lying flat on the ground, and that's what you have to be wise to find. So The blaze maybe doesn't stand out from far away. Maybe you have to be right on top of it. Who knows? Not sure. I'm going to keep going. Under the floorboards, and I know there's been some issues with this one recently, which is why I have that giant no chest here flag. But in scrapbook 207, which is very recent, Absaroki Hut, Forrest said, I had learned from a Montana old-timer that tradition required the builder to leave some kind of thank you token under the floor, a talisman of sorts. And Ramblin' Pam actually a year ago had talked about the same story where Forrest Fenn donated the Sharp Cabin to the Buffalo Bill Cody Museum, and he made sure that the hammer that was under the floorboards originally was returned under the floorboards at the Buffalo Bill Historic Museum. So on Ramblin' Pam's video, she said, Forrest told me it used to be common to put things under the floorboards of their cabins. He told them to make sure to look under the floorboards. So just very interesting. Under wood, under gravestones, under flag markers. And again, I'm going to reiterate, it is not at the Buffalo Bill Cody Museum. If you go to scrapbook 207, Forrest is very adamant about telling everyone it is not associated with any property owned by the Buffalo Bill Cody Museum or anything like that. So I'm definitely not implying to go there and look for it. I'm just saying that he's establishing the importance of looking under floorboards or wood or looking under things for tokens or talismans. So just calling it out, and I'm going to move forward. This one I love. So maybe most people haven't seen this. This is from Vimeo. I don't think it's on YouTube yet, but this is from Dal Neitzel. San Lazaro Artifacts number 2. I think there's 3 parts to this, but number 2 is where he talks about Pedro hiding a chest by the river. And I'm just going to hit play on this and we could listen to it. Here we go.
When Pedro learned that he was going to get killed if he didn't head down the river to what is now El Paso and into Mexico, so he took his chest and he found an empty room someplace that was falling in. He took his chest and he stuck it in there under some timbers, some vigas, some latillas, and tucked it in there nice and put some rocks around it and foliage and limbs so nobody could see it. And he went down the river trying to escape the inevitable that was going to come tomorrow or the next day. And he may have been, his idea was to come back later and retrieve my treasures.
So I cut off that last part, but it might be the most important part. So Pedro was going to come back and retrieve his treasures, which are basically just notes about his life, his biography. So it's very applicable to Fenn hiding his biography in his own chest. And it's pretty awesome. So this is one of my favorite hidden gems from Dal Neitzel and Forrest Fenn. And again, it's called San Lazaro Artifacts number 2. But it's talking about Pedro and hiding his treasures in a chest under the floorboards or vigas and latillas, which are basically, lumber from the pueblos and the crossbeams, and then hiding his chest there with all of his riches, his memories, his treasures. So if you have not checked that video out, highly recommend it, and I'll put the link in the description, along with the other 2 I've already played. Sorry. So, a lot of you are probably already arguing that it is not associated with the structure. Fenn has said that many, many times, and I get that. So it's not associated with the Buffalo Bill Museum. It's not associated with Pedro's Pueblo. But let me just show you why I think he talks about not associated with the structure. And no offense, Cynthia, I understand that the treasure's not buried under a structure, but I do not think Fenn has ever said that none of the clues are associated with the structure. And I've asked Fenn Forrest to clarify this, and it hasn't happened. But anyways, here we go.
One of my favorite clues, and I don't think we mentioned this before, one of the Today Show clues was that it wasn't associated with a structure. But I think you need to tell them the story behind what particular structure you were talking about.
Well, people searching for the treasure were tearing up old outhouses and digging in the outhouses. And so that's why people are calling me and telling me, please tell your searchers to stop digging in the outhouses. And so that's why I gave the clue on the Today Show. It's not associated with any kind of structure.
And I wanted him to say outhouse, but the Today Show didn't like that.
So there you go. So they were specifically talking about not digging up old outhouses. And I also know that he said that about the Buffalo Bill Museum. So I'm pretty sure the chest is not hiding directly under a man-made structure, but that's not to say that any of the other 8 clues are not associated with the structure. So I'm going to move on from this because I'm just speculating, but I just wanted to flag this one for y'all that he only said it was not associated with the structure because he was tired of people digging up outhouses. So anyways, here we go. So under a log or under wood. So most people that have Too Far to Walk are familiar with the story Mirror on My Wall and the typewriter that talks about under wood. And then I have 2 quotes on the right, or 2 answers on the right, talking about kicking over logs. So maybe the chest is hidden under a dead tree stump, a dead log, some wood that you got to kick over. I'm not sure, but let me just read a couple of these. Stay in your job only if you love it. Get out in the mountains and turn over a log to see what's there. Avoid those things that distract you from your self-esteem. The key word is contentment. If you could find it, everything else has already fallen in place. And then the last word from Forrest Fenn in 2016. I read a book called Secrets of San Lazaro Pueblo. I talk about finding that first arrowhead. I was with my father, and when I picked it up, I told myself, this little projectile has been laying on the ground for 2,000 years, waiting for me to come along. Is that not exciting? And I picked it up and looked at my father, and the expression on his face, when he saw the expression on my face, was something that's burned into my memory. I'll stay there forever. I mean, I wish more fathers would take their sons and daughters out into the countryside, not necessarily looking for arrowheads, but looking for, roll over a log and see what's under it. So again, it's talking about kicking over logs, looking what's under there, but I'm going to flag that burned into my memory. He said the exact same thing when he picked up the gravestone in Thrill of the Chase, My War for Me. So there's been moments that are burned into his memory. So when he's picked up the flagstone in My War for Me, when he picked up his arrowhead, in this story, there's moments in time that are burned into his memory. And I think a lot of this stuff comes back to maybe where he hid the treasure chest. Moving on. Under a rock. So there's been lots of allusions and references to hiding things under rocks or pile of rocks. So I will just jump right into this. This is from Altered Dimensions, 2015. But he also wrote a similar or identical story in Scrapbook 118 and Once Upon a While, Montana Golden. But a lot of them have to do with hiding a Dr. Pepper in the cooling waters of a rivulet somewhere in my allotted public acreage. And in Altered Dimensions, he was talking about, I think it was like, there's 600 million acres of land and there's 300 million Americans, so everyone gets 2 acres. So that's where that stemmed from. But he's talking about hiding his little treasure, his Dr. Pepper, just in the cooling waters of a rivulet. And who's to say that he's not allowed to do that? And this last little quote says, there's no place that you could put a treasure that under the right circumstances, there are no complications. So, I don't know. I think that just points to kind of his mindset when he was hiding the chest, and maybe it's near water. We all know it's not underwater, but pretty cool. So here's one reference to under a rock. Under a pile of rocks. Scrapbook 174 and Once Upon a While, page 80. They're both in reference to the Quahada chief on a black pony. And I'll just read this. With Captain Carter's original map in hand, I didn't want to carry a copy. Bill and I hiked on weekends. Back and forth across the grassy rises and rugged dips we walked, binoculars in hand. We were ever watchful for the errant pile of rocks that were deliberately placed to keep scavenging animals from digging. 20 days or more we did that, often finding remnants of the fight, a canteen, a rusty knife, a brass cavalry uniform button, lots of bullet casings, but no pile of rocks. We replaced everything as it lay, lest we betray the sanctity of that battleground. I just think it's awesome. It feels like maybe this is how the chest is hidden. So it's not underground, but maybe it's hidden, entombed under a pile of rocks with a marker. Like this little white cross could be the place. Like just something like that. Maybe that's how it's hidden. I don't think there's going to be a white picket cross, stuck into the ground with the chest under it. But there could be a errant pile of rocks somewhere that the chest is hidden beneath. So here's yet another reference to pile of rocks. And even more. Scrapbook 166, Graveyard Logic, which turned into Once Upon a While Divorce Logic. Again, he said, after she threw some things into the pot, I put the lid on, placed it reverently into the ground, and covered it up with dirt. Then she started piling rocks on the grave. She kept piling them on. I suppose maybe she was afraid that somehow her divorce would get out of that hole. So again, it's just, there's a hole beneath the ground where she put that little vase in. I think it was a vase or an urn. And she covered it up with rocks and dirt and piled rocks on top of that where the arrow is pointing. So it's pretty buried, but the pile of rocks could be the blaze, or maybe you don't call it buried because there's rocks on top of it. I'm not sure. But again, this is like the third or fourth or 1 millionth time he's talked about piles of rocks on top of things that are important, whether it's good or bad. Here's some more. Under Rocks. Scrapbook 92. Me and Mummy Joe, 2014. And also Once Upon a While. Me and Mummy Joe, page 124. And I will read this. 25 years later, I became friends with two of the men who excavated the cave. They were Bobby Edgar and George Dabbage. For 2 years in the middle 60s, they carefully moved rocks, shoveled dirt, screened for artifacts, compiled data, and helped uncover Mummy Joe. And the cave finally had a name. This one's cool. I mean, Forrest definitely seemed to be obsessed with at least George Dabbage and Bobby Edgar. I know he talks about kind of following their archaeological discoveries and digs and their history. And then on the right, me and Mummy Joe, that huge rock he talks about, I think he said that was the opera lady singing on the way out of the park, or the fat lady singing, which maybe it's the homage to once you find the chest, that's when the lady sings. But I'll also call out that cave or cove looks very much like an alcove, and I will get there later. But all this is under rocks, in a cave, under dirt, and the cave finally had a name. So, moving on. In a long forgotten alcove. All right, this is what I was talking about. So, this is from Old Santa Fe Trading Co. I was going to put the date, but they've completely updated their website. So now this blog actually says 2019. It's early Spanish artifacts, which also was put into, I believe, Too Far to Walk. But this section from Old Santa Fe Trading Co. was not added to early Spanish artifacts. So I'm going to flag it here for y'all. And I'm going to read this. I recently published my memoir. It's called The Thrill of the Chase, and in it I told some misadventures from my youthful years growing up in Central Texas and around Yellowstone. If I had my way, everyone would jot down their memoirs or memories. If not for their children and grandchildren, then just to document how life was lived during our times. And if those memories are not published, then surely they would be sent to the Library of Congress, where they will be stored in some long-forgotten alcove for a few hundred years. But just think about how some elderly historian, 500 years from now, wearing bespectacled glasses, will be touched by your words. Those things are important. So an alcove, for anyone who doesn't know, it's kind of like a recess or a niche or a tuck away inside of a rock or a cove or a wall. And I think a lot of people think that the chest could be hidden in a way like this. So I just wanted to flag for everyone that back on Old Santa Fe Trading Company, when he was talking about early Spanish artifacts, I think this is actually the conclusion to that blog post. But either way, here's some alcoves. Here's what they look like. These pictures are not in the on the blog post. I added these myself. But these are the types of things I look for, and I think a lot of people look for these kind of rock structures or these kind of alcoves or niches to find that treasure chest. Moving on. Near a pile of rocks. So I put the little mind blown emoji because I'm not sure if everyone even knows this, but in Too Far to Walk, I wish I hadn't, page 98 to 100. On the far left, you'll see on page 98, he's jumping off the canyon to jump onto the pine tree, to slide down and get that mountain lion that they shot. 2 pages later, you'll see the bottom of the canyon, which is on page 100. Nothing much to it. You kind of just glance over it, and it's very interesting. Great illustration by Danny Boldelson. But if you put them together, and I'm not even sure I stitched these perfectly, it's very interesting. One, it's way shorter than you would think. I think he talks about a 200-foot canyon in the story. And this is not even close, it's more like 30 feet. But the most important part of this entire thing is that his right boot is embedded into the ground on page 100 and kind of inverted. So was it an accident? If it is, I have no idea how accidents like this happen, especially when you control your entire production, editing, page by page, everything. And if it is intentional, what the heck does it mean? So does it mean that the treasure chest is embedded in the ground near a canyon wall by a pine tree? I'm really not sure. But for anyone that has never seen this, I thought it was pretty awesome. And maybe it will help someone. Maybe this is the inadvertent clue. It's the inadvertent shoe. There you go. In a rock well. So I did an entire video on this a couple months ago, just talking about like why use rock wells so much in your books, specifically Thrill of the Chase. And for, again, anyone that doesn't know, there's a lot of similarities or mirror images of Rockwell illustrations or paintings. So on the left, it's No Place for the Biddies, then Jumpstarting Learning Curve, Grand Marble Champion, the No Swimming Hole, Stout-Hearted Men, which is called Over There by Rockwell, and then Teachers with Ropes. And so just very interesting. And if there's nothing to this and Forrest just wanted his illustrator to mimic Rockwell, that's fine. But maybe there's something more to it. Maybe all these things tie together and that it's in like some sort of rock cranny or rock well or rock alcove or something like that. So just wanted to put this together. And if you're interested in more of the Rockwell stuff, go check out my other video. And maybe it's above ground, which is interesting. He's talked about metal detectors a couple times. The first time is, again, Gypsy's Kiss, Collected Works, 2013. He said, a metal detector will help if you're in exactly the right spot. And that may seem like a Fennism. Like, yeah, of course, if you're right on top of the treasure, a metal detector will help. However, if you think about it, if the chest is right on top of the ground, a metal detector is not going to help. The chest is right there. So the metal detector will only help if you're in the right spot, which means that a metal detector could potentially help. So just something to think about. Again, I don't think it's just sitting on top of the dirt somewhere, just shining out in the sunshine because of that. And then the second quote, I think banning them from the park is going too far, he said. In the big picture of Yellowstone, how terrible is it to have a metal detector in your backpack? Well, I think it's pretty terrible, actually, because I think you're going to get fined if they even find a metal detector in your backpack. But I think Fenn's proving the point that maybe a metal detector will help. And if it's in Yellowstone and happens to be buried, it's all the more reason to... I'm not going to say it. Anyways, metal detectors are not allowed in Yellowstone, period. Next quote. Lucky Love, this was from Lorraine Mills, but it's a Lucky Love interview on YouTube, 2011. And he said, well, I'm burying them deep enough so that normally a metal detector won't find them, 3 to 3.5 feet deep. He's talking about burying his bells, but I just wanted to flag that he buried his bells deep enough to where a metal detector will not help. And that's where he qualifies 3 to 3.5 feet deep. So, for all you people out there bulldozing, national parks looking for the treasure, he did not bury it. If he did bury it, it's less than 3 feet buried because this quote right here. But anyways, it's not buried more than 3 feet deep. I'm pretty sure it's near the surface for all the reasons I've already talked about. Back to being exposed and being on top of the surface. So in Daily Beast 2013, the writer of that story said, he told me the chest is exposed to rain and snow and could be scorched in a forest fire. Now I know this is not first-hand information. I don't think Forrest corrected him though, so it's semi-credible. But I want to couple that with the next quote, which is best? Lying on the ground on a treasure chest, your bones rotting in the sun, or laying in a hospital room with tubes down your throat. So these kind of quotes kind of imply that maybe it is on top of the ground or very close to the surface where rain and snow and even sun could peek through, maybe some detritus, that's a Toby Eunice word, or some foliage or things like that. So not sure if it's buried or sepulchered or entombed or under latillas or vigas, but these kind of quotes make me think that it's not just shoveled with dirt over it and no one's going to find it. I just think it's hidden. Next quote. So he said wind may affect it. In Mysterious Writings, I think it's called Nature Makes Her Own Rules, 2014. The question was, Mr. Fenn, in relation to the final resting place of the chest, which of the 4 natural elements, earth, wind, water, fire, would mostly compromise it resting? James. And Forrest said, I don't think earth can hurt it. Under the right conditions, wind might affect it. It's probably already wet, and look at what the fire did to the Twin Towers. Nature makes her own rules, James, so I try not to be so absolute when talking about her. And then, even in the comment section on that, Forrest commented, don't be too confused by my wind comment, Jenny. Tornadoes are wind, and there aren't too many landscapes that can't be changed, or can't change. I'll admit there aren't too many tornadoes in the Rocky Mountains, but they do occur once in a while. Very Fenny here. The fact that he says that wind is most likely to affect it, however, it's already wet, just interesting. I mean, you could marinate on that yourself. Jenny was asking whether wind could knock over trees to block like the entrance or the path to the treasure chest, and that's where Forrest commented. So I don't think he's saying that wind would obstruct the path to the treasure. I think he's saying that wind somehow is most likely to affect the treasure's resting place. And I cannot figure that one out. But either way, I wanted to put it up here. This one's kind of interesting. It has to do with kind of being above ground and how far away can you see it. But in Scrapbook 78, I named it Acrimony on the Blogs, because if you go to Scrapbook 78, that's kind of what Forrest is responding to. Apparently there was a lot of acrimony on the blogs, and Forrest wanted to answer a bunch of questions and misinformation. But in this scrapbook he wrote, I have not said that a searcher was closer than 12 feet from the treasure. It is not likely that anyone would get that close and not find it. That is a very crazy quote, because the 200-footer didn't even know he was that close. If he was 188 more feet, he should have found it, which is interesting. I know Sean Dodson has also followed this up with, has anyone been closer than 12 feet? And Forrest refused to answer the question. Don't know if that means yes or no. But either way, 12 feet, that's just very close, which makes me think that it's not buried. Like, 12 feet is about the same length as a Volkswagen Bug, and I just found these online. Forrest did not write any of these. 12 feet is 2 times as tall as Napoleon. It's 2 times as long as the bed in your bedroom. It's 1/3 the length of a telephone pole. It's 1/5 the length of a bowling lane. And for you weirdos that are obsessed with counting everything by lengths, it's 18 lengths. So not 66,000 north of Santa Fe. It's just 18. So 12 feet away. It's not likely that anyone would get that close and not find it. So very interesting. So when you're on Google Earth and you think you found the blaze, I'm going to say that's probably not true, because I feel like you have to be boots on the ground to find the blaze based on this quote. So there you go. And then finally, I don't know, I kind of always end this with a general thought, which it just feels that you get to the blaze or you get to the 9th clue and you have to look down, and you have to look down not just because the treasure's at your feet, but maybe shovel some things away or scrape some rocks away or remove a flagstone or, kick some rocks to the side or something like that, because I think the chest is going to be there. And according to the Voice of America most recent audio, Forrest kind of talks about that. And here we go.
And it's hard to find, deliberately hard to find, but it certainly isn't impossible. You have to go back to the poem. If you have to find out where the first clue is, where warm waters halt. That's the first clue, and then take it from there. The clues are chronological after that. One leads to another, and when you get to the 9th clue, look down, because you're where the treasure chest is.
So when you get to the 9th clue, look down, because that's where the treasure chest is. And you got to look down because it's not just sitting at your feet already. So I have a feeling that the chest is hidden very close to the blaze, below the blaze, and maybe you got to uncover some small things, small rocks, debris, flagstones, latillas, vigas, that kind of stuff in order to find the chest. So thank you all for listening. Sorry, this is 35 minutes. It's 20 minutes longer than I thought it would go. So apologies for that. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching. Hopefully someone finds it next year. Cheers. Thank you, Forrest. Thank you all.